Welcome to Better Than Ever Live, wherever you're watching or wherever you're listening. Hope you're making today your masterpiece. In this live show, we're going to talk about sleep, specifically a lack of sleep, and what effect a lack of sleep has on your risk of injury, whether it's playing a sport or exercise or just injury risk in general. My name's Dr. David Geier, double board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, media medical expert. I help you feel and perform your best regardless of age, injury, or medical history. Please understand, in this Better Than Ever Live, I'm not giving you medical advice. As always, I say that all the time, but this is meant for general information and educational purposes only. If you have comments, questions about lack of sleep, injury risk, or any of the studies we talk about in this live show, please leave it in the chat. I would love it, as I always say, if you'd give your first name and where you're located along with your comment or question. If it's about sleep or injury risk, I'll talk about that after the live discussion. If it's about any of the three topics we talked about before, I'll kind of do it as we go. If you have injury questions, an injury you've suffered, or want ideas or information about that, I don't do that on this show anymore, but I will be here tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for Ask Dr. Geier Live, so check that out. The first study I want to talk about is very relevant to what we just went through over the last 2 years, and that is the effectiveness of home workouts, and specifically live streaming of home workouts. There was a study published just recently in the British Journal of Sports Medicine that looked at live streaming of home workouts during the pandemic. We know that the pandemic caused us as a society not to get as much physical activity. It took a toll on our physical and mental health. So what these researchers did is they looked at what they call digital home exercises during places, in places that were locked down and during those lockdowns. It was a randomized controlled trial. There was just about 1,300 people in it from 9 countries that were either randomized to do a digital home exercise program or nothing. They were the control group. 4 weeks of doing that, 4 weeks of the study, the ones in the home exercise program did a live stream home exercise involving multiple parts of the body. But the other thing, not just the live stream people, but also the control group, they had access to pre-recorded workouts for 4 weeks after that. Now, what the researchers found, probably not surprising compared to the control group, the live stream digital home workouts did increase physical activity, but they also improved mental well-being, anxiety, and sleep quality, as well as the exercise or the motivation to exercise. What they didn't find was any of those benefits, or at least as it pertains to mental well-being, anxiety, sleep quality, and motivation to exercise, did not find those with pre-recorded workouts done at home. Now, this gets to things like the Beachbody app, which they may have live stuff now, I don't know, but most of those are pre-recorded on the app. I know things like Peloton, some of that's live, but a lot of it's pre-recorded, things like that. Now, one thing that was interesting in their study was that the live stream home exercise participation was good at first, and then the dropout rate was pretty high. People gave it up pretty quickly. Now, I don't know necessarily that means anything. Is it the intensity of the workout? Is it they hate working out at home? I know for me, I can't stand working out at home. Live stream would make it better than non-live stream, it'd be better than recorded, but not that difficult. But my point is, if for some reason you need to work out at home, whether it's finances, whether it's equipment, whether it's lack of transportation, whatever it is, maybe see if you can have access to some kind of live streaming workout with other people, maybe somebody live encouraging participants to push a little bit harder, and then try to stick with it. One thing I always say about exercise is the best type of exercise is the type you'll actually do. And this is worth a try as something that you would actually do. And there's home exercises and live stream home exercises for all types of exercise. I've seen it for cycling with Peloton and others. I've seen it with treadmills and running. I've seen it with rowing machines. There's all kinds of things. And so if I promise you, there are ways. I would suspect there's dance, all kinds of different things. I can't even imagine. So if working out at home is better for you, maybe doing it as a live stream, live interactive participation might make it a little bit better. Now, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the microbiome of the gut and its role in physical activity and the other way around, the role of physical activity on our gut health. But there's a new study that just came out showing that our gut microbiome may actually be good for our brains and for our cognitive function. So what researchers did, this is one of those large cross-sectional studies, as it usually goes with a lot of these nutritional studies and overall health studies. But what they did is they used this huge study of tons and tons of people across the country and took all these different factors and tried to put sort of a correlation link together between gut health, gut microbial composition, and somebody's cognitive status. And not just young kids or senior citizens necessarily, but middle-aged adults. And this study was in the Journal of the American Medical Association in their neurology journal. And it was over 3,100 people, a huge number of people. 615 of those, after doing the cognitive assessment, also sent a stool sample so the researchers could assess their DNA. And what they found is the gut microbiome was significantly associated with cognitive factors and the risk of cognitive decline. And what they think is, and this gets back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago, that this may be what it is about gut health that at least plays a role in our cognitive health, but it also may play a role in our overall physical health. And that was the gut's production of short-chain fatty acid. It's a byproduct of food going through your gut, going through the gut flora, and that those short-chain fatty acids may have a large role in sort of the gut-brain axis, how our gut and brain interact. But they do appear to be protective against dementia and cognitive impairment. So if you ever needed any more reason to keep your gut healthy, whether it's clean diet, prebiotics, probiotics, that kind of thing, maybe another good reason to do that. And then the last one I want to talk about is a fruit that I'm not so big on. I don't dislike it, but it's not really my thing either, and those are watermelons. There was a study just published in the journal Current Atherosclerosis Reports, which I am sure is a really fun read generally. But what they were looking at is, could potentially watermelons be good overall for health? We know they've got antioxidants, minerals, vitamins, but what these researchers looked at is two specific amino acids in watermelon, citrulline and arginine, and they're precursors of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a substance in our blood, in our bodies, that's a vasodilator, and it's helpful to control your blood pressure, it's helpful to keep your cholesterol and lipids down, and it's involved in glucose control. So both from a nitric oxide standpoint from those two amino acids, plus all the polyphenols and the carotenoids, which are very abundant in watermelons, it's thought that all of these different things in watermelons makes it very good, make watermelons very good for your overall health, your heart health, and your metabolic health. Now, I don't know, I'm not real big on watermelon. It's just not a taste of mine. And there's a number of fruits that do have a lot of those same benefits. Grapes are thought to be one. Blueberries, some people say, are another one. But if you're a big fan of watermelon, maybe that's the way to go. I always get frustrated when I get a fruit salad and there's chunks of watermelon in it. I don't know, for whatever reason, that bothers me a little bit. All right, let's get into the main topic we're going to get to today, and that is sleep and injury risk. So we've all heard the recommendations that we need 8 hours of sleep each night, or at least 7 hours of sleep. For kids, that's probably even higher, maybe as high as 9, 10 hours or more. According to the CDC, about a third of adults get less than 7 hours of sleep a night, 35%. And there are a huge number of people, including some friends of mine, that think, oh, I don't need 7 or 8 hours of sleep. I can get 4 or 5 hours of sleep and I do just fine. The problem with that is many studies have shown that very few people can actually do that and function well. Whenever somebody says that they can do well on 4 hours of sleep a night, 5 hours of sleep a night, and I've heard Donald Trump has reportedly said that in the past. There's a number of famous people that say that. But I'm always curious, try to do that for a week or two with no caffeine, no diet sodas, no coffee, no tea, and then let's see how you do. And if you can do it completely functioning normal, maybe you are one of those few. But studies have shown there aren't that many people that can do that. Anyway, looking at kids, that's adults, 35% that don't get 7 hours of sleep a night. Kids, just as bad. A CDC study of middle and high school students is about 60% of middle school students don't get enough sleep. 70% of high school students don't get enough sleep, at least during the week on school nights. And all of this lack of sleep, whether it's adults or whether it's kids, it is really, really bad for our long-term health. There's so many health conditions that at least have a correlative association with a lack of sleep. Heart attacks, heart disease, strokes, asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, certain cancers, arthritis, depression, kidney disease, diabetes. All of those at least have some link, maybe not cause and effect, but a correlation, an association with a lack of sleep. But what I care about as an orthopedic surgeon are the risk of orthopedic injuries. Now, again, we talked 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure exactly when it was, we talked about how sleep affects athletic performance. But more importantly, again, in the orthopedic world, and probably for your perspective, is a lack of sleep a risk factor for injury in athletes and active people? Now, we know that decreased sleep increases fatigue. And I just as a good example, have not slept well the last 2 nights. I am dragging today. I tried to sleep well. It wasn't for, intentionally staying up too late or waking up too early. I just woke up a lot this morning. I've been up since about 2 in the morning, and it's really, really frustrating. So we know decreased sleep equals increased fatigue. But it's not just that. In terms of what we talked about with athletic performance, decreased sleep reduces, or it impairs our reaction time. It influences our cognitive performance. Yes, all of that affects how well you play in your sport, but it also might increase the risk of injury. So I did, maybe a few hours worth of research looking at the links between sleep and injury risk. And there was one variable over and over and over that made the conclusions in these studies difficult. And that variable was the overlap between sleep and subjective well-being. Basically, if you don't sleep very well, that's going to have a big, big effect on your mood, on your fatigue, on your stress. And those are linked to physical symptoms, things like muscle soreness. There was a study, and I'll get to this a little more specifically later, but there was a study of adolescent soccer players that showed that an increase in sleep, getting more, leads to positive dose-dependent effects on subjective well-being. The more sleep you get, the better your well-being. Each increase in sleep, increase in subjective well-being. And some of the negative effects of training a lot on young athletes, you can mitigate those effects by getting more sleep. So we know that sleep and well-being are related, and they may work together to influence injury risk. We're going to talk about that a little bit off and on through this. But let's look at what I found, and this is probably the last 5-6 years of data on what role a lack of sleep has on injuries in sports and exercise. There was a study just last year, a review study, that showed that chronic suboptimal sleep, not getting enough sleep, was linked to a risk of musculoskeletal pain, so bone and joint pain, and sports injury. What they found is that the amount of sleep that you need to be able to have to keep basically a normal risk of injury and not an increased risk is getting at least 7 hours of sleep. People who get 7 hours of sleep on a regular basis for 14 days they're better off. But those who get less than 7 hours of sleep for 14 days, 1.7 times higher risk of injury, almost double the risk of injury if you go 2 straight weeks getting less than 7 hours of sleep or getting 7 hours or less. But what they didn't find was a link between lack of sleep and specific injuries. It seemed to be all over the map in terms of what injuries they found. Now, not all studies do show a link between injury and lack of sleep. There was a study looking at college football players, Division I college football players. 2/3 of the players in these sleep questionnaires met the diagnosis or met the threshold for at least one risk of sleep disorder. During the season, their sleep dropped from about 7.25 hours to just over 6 hours during the season. They measured sleep and basically then tried to correlate it with risk of injury over the course of the season. Didn't find a link. An Australian study looking at Australian football players also said there was no link between how long you sleep and your sleep efficiency on injuries in Australian football players. But instead of using numerical injuries, they were using time lost from the sport as a substitute for injuries. And in that study, the athletes were horrible at actually keeping up with their sleep data, and that probably negated any risk that they would have seen. But having said that, every other study I saw, and we're going to talk about them, did show a link between a lack of sleep and the risk of injury. 2014, the earliest study I saw, and this was looking at, we're going to start with young athletes and kind of work to adults, middle school, high school athletes. The hours of sleep that the kids get every night was an independent predictor of injury. The young athletes who slept less than 8 hours a night, 1.7 times higher risk of injury than young athletes who got 8 hours of sleep a night or more. Another study of adolescent athletes, those that get more than 8 hours of sleep each night during the weeknight, reduced risk of injury by 61%. So if you have young kids that play sports, make sure they get 8 hours of sleep every night. Now, I haven't talked about it much on this Better Than Ever live show. I used to talk a lot. In fact, I gave a TEDx talk on youth sports and injuries in youth sports and a lot of the problems in youth sports. And what we've seen over the years, whether it's the 10,000 hour rule, it's coaches and parents pushing kids to get scholarships for college, whatever it is, we've seen the amount of sports played, the frequency that they train, the duration that they train, the overall volume that they're training. These kids as young as 6 years old, 8 years old, it has gone way, way up from the little league level, club sports, travel sports, high school sports. If you just look at the high school age athletes, 15 to 19, one study that I saw showed that an increase in training load, increase in training intensity, along with a decrease in the sleep volume was associated with a higher risk of injury. Now, one of the best age groups to study these types of things, because they're sort of in a controlled setting, they can't really go anywhere, you have all these research people around, are college athletes. So let's see some of the best things we're going to see about sleep and injury risk are in these studies of college athletes. There was a study of college cross-country runners 3 years ago. 53% of the runners sustained a new injury or what's called an exacerbation. They made a pre-existing injury worse during a single season, which is crazy, right? Over half the runners suffered an injury during the season. That alone is bad enough. But what they found, in addition to large amounts of miles run, poor sleep quality was significantly associated with a higher risk of injury in those college cross-country athletes. And so the authors of that study say, hey, coaches, athletic trainers, you need to, in addition to modifying some of your training things, you might want to look at some lifestyle changes for these cross-country runners. A study last year looking at college volleyball players, they looked at not just sleep, but they looked at mood, fatigue, stress, soreness, sleep quality, sleep duration. For an entire year among these college volleyball players, they had 54, I think it was, injuries over the course of that year. And this is where that link between subjective well-being and sleep gets tricky. They found that on days where there was not an injury, mood, fatigue, stress, soreness, sleep quality, sleep duration were worse the day before an injury occurred. So if you didn't sleep well the night before, you're in a bad mood, you're tired on, let's just say today's Thursday, you're at more risk of injury Friday. Now, they ran these mathematical prediction models, and what they found is that they could predict injuries over the course of the season by your fatigue scores the day before, your mood the day before, your stress the day before, your muscle soreness the day before, and yes, your sleep quality and duration. And then in male collegiate basketball players, they did essentially the same type of study. Over the course of the season, one team, they had 32 injuries. Like in the college volleyball study, you could predict injury by mood, fatigue, stress, soreness, and sleep duration. But here's where it was different. In these basketball players, they did these multivariable analysis. Sleep was the only one that was an independent predictor of injury. The others, mood, fatigue, stress, were not. What it seems like is happening, and this is sort of a take-home point here, poor sleep leads to poor mood, leads to fatigue, it leads to increased stress that also compound your risk of injury, but it's the sleep that's the bottom line issue. The mood, the stress, the fatigue are sort of after effects. So if you get your sleep under control, that may be enough to influence your risk of injury, hopefully lower your risk of injury. Plus, you'll feel better, be less stressed, less tired, and things like that. Neelam, I will We'll talk about endorphins, and that's actually a good question. I'll come back to that. That's good. And what they found, getting back to the college basketball players, if all they did was increase their sleep by 1 hour, 43% decreased injury risk the next day. I think that's fascinating. Now, let's finish this up talking about the risk of injury in adults. There was a study 2 years ago, 2020, looking at sleep duration and injury risk, injury incidence in the Army, in the Special Operations soldiers, Special Operation Forces. Now, I've always argued the military, people in the military are closer to professional athletes than regular adults. Their physical training and everything else is much closer to pro athletes, but still, it's worth kind of seeing what effects a lack of sleep has on the military. Now, yeah, it's a little tricky. In this study, it was pretty much all men under the age of 35. I mean, it is the military. Just over half, 53%, had suffered an injury, bone and joint injury, over the previous 12 months. Again, another really high injury rate for these soldiers. But what they found is the soldiers who slept 4 hours or less a night, which is common in the military, twice as likely, more than twice as likely to suffer a bone and joint injury compared to those who slept 8 hours or more. What they found when they broke it down by age is that older men, the effects of a lack of sleep were much higher, led to a much higher risk of bone and joint injury than in the younger soldiers. Probably because the younger soldiers just recover faster, not just from a sleep standpoint, but from a bone and joint standpoint. And then last, adult endurance injury. Another study in 2020 showed that new injury risk had a significant association with less than 7 hours of sleep each night. But the difference is, compared to what I was talking about with the kids, here, with adult endurance runners, there was a 14-day lag, meaning if your sleep is bad, less than 7 hours of sleep, it may not manifest tomorrow, but it may manifest any time in the next 2 weeks. That low sleep quantity, poor sleep quality impacts your risk of injury, and again, for up to 2 weeks. Now, there's clearly a link between not getting enough sleep and an increased risk of bone injury, like fractures, joint injury, like knee, shoulder, ankle, things like that in sports and exercise. We saw with the college volleyball study, it looks like there's a cutoff of 7 hours of sleep each night for adults. If you can get 7 hours or more each night, your risk of injury is lower. High school athletes, middle school athletes, little league, youth, club sports, travel sports, it might be more like 8 hours of sleep a night. And we talked about there's overlap between sleep and things like mood, stress, fatigue, and more, and all of those play a role, but sleep seems to be the common link to all of it. So get better sleep, you'll probably have better mood, less fatigue, less stress, lower risk of injury. All right, if you have any comments about that, feel free to post those. We'll talk about those, and then we'll wrap up. Neelam is from India. Great to have you, Neelam. He asks, can serotonin endorphins decrease due to lack of sleep? I don't know that I have actually seen a study, but that does very, very much make sense. In case you don't know, endorphins are, if you've ever been running, this is where you really see them. This is the runner's high. This is that great feeling you get after you finish a 30-minute run or 60-minute run or a sprint session for 10 minutes, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you just feel like you're on top of the world. I don't know that sleep necessarily plays a role, but here's where I think it might, because sleep and lack of sleep has a significant effect on hormones. The stress hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, also cortisol, one of the chronic stress hormones, but also things like estrogen and testosterone. So I suspect all of that probably plays a role in endorphins. It's still, I don't know that necessarily, you didn't ask this, Neelam, but this is sort of a corollary to that. I don't know that I necessarily would not exercise because, all right, I'm not going to get the same benefits, or even if I'm at a risk of injury because I didn't sleep real well, I might just try to do it a little more carefully. Maybe don't push as hard. Maybe do it somewhere safer, so you don't trip and fall. Again, with sleep, in addition to just overall your body doesn't recover as well, again, you have that reduced reaction time, the cognitive awareness and all of that plays a role in potentially suffering an injury that way. So that's something to think about. All right, that is all I've got for you today. If you want to read the studies that I mentioned in this video, there's 6 or 7 of them. There's links in the description below. Definitely check those out. I don't know, maybe you're not like me and you don't care about all the data. I like that kind of thing. If you like live streams like this, you like videos like this, optimal health and wellness, healing and recovery from orthopedic injuries so you can feel and perform your best regardless of age, injury, or medical history. Subscribe to this channel, click the bell to be notified when I release a new video or when I start a new live stream. Now, if you have an orthopedic injury and you want to see somebody who really knows about bone and joint injuries in athletes and active people, I'd be happy to help and hopefully help you avoid surgery. I'm the rare orthopedic surgeon that tries to keep you from having surgery. Double board certified orthopedic surgeon and sports medicine specialist. I would love to talk to you about all your options to recover from injury, not just surgery. Hopefully not just cortisone shots, things like physical therapy. There's a link in the description below to drdavidgeier.com. Go to the contact page in the upper right corner of the homepage. You'll see the contact page where you can request an appointment to see me. I am, because I've done videos now on a lot of peptides and things like penisin polysulfate and PRP and exosomes, I'm getting people reaching out to me from all over the country. And as of right now, I am not doing, and my practice does not do telemedicine because it's really hard to get medical licenses in all the different states in the United States. And I have not been excited about the idea of doing health coaching where I talk to you about an injury and that kind of thing and then tell you, hey, these are some of the treatments out there. And maybe I'll start that at some point, but I have been working to get certified in peptides, and what I am finding out is there's a huge number of people that like to buy peptides, and this isn't just with peptides, this is with all kinds of things, medications and other things you buy on the internet, but certainly peptides that are sold by these dubious online companies that have tons of endotoxins and contaminants, and they make people really sick. You just don't know what you're getting online, and I'm afraid that if I just start doing coaching and saying, hey, this treatment may be helpful, people will then just, instead of trying to find a doctor to get it from, where they get it from pharmacies that are approved by the FDA and they're inspected on a regular basis and they go through quality controls and all of this, they'll just buy it from these dubious companies and get really sick, and I don't want to promote any of that. So having said that, at least right now, we're having people come to Charleston, South Carolina, or my office in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're both great cities. Come on down. You will absolutely love it. It's 75 degrees and sunny right now in Charleston. I promise, compared to the weather in most of the country, I promise you'd like it. Having said that, that's all I've got for you. Remember to subscribe to the podcast if you can't be here live. Better Than Ever Live, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check out my podcast, Better Than Ever Daily, which are short 30 to 60 second podcasts on all kinds of health studies and health tips. Make sure you check that out. If you have friends that love health and wellness and want to live longer and feel better in the process, tell them about this channel. Tell them about my website, the podcast, whatever it is. I am happy to help. Thank you so much for watching. Really enjoyed being here. Don't forget. I was trying to say do not and don't, and I got something weird there. I will be here tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, for Ask Dr. Geier Live, only on YouTube, not LinkedIn or Facebook. So those of you on those platforms, be on YouTube tomorrow. Subscribe to YouTube so you know when I'm on live. And it will not be recorded as a podcast. So you have to be there live if you want to submit a question. But if you've got an orthopedic, in fact, tomorrow I may even be there a little early. But I will, if you're there live and ask a question, I will answer it. It won't be specific medical advice, but I talk about that injury, talk about the surgery or treatments for it. I talk about the recovery, all of that kind of stuff. So then you can take that for what you want, talk to your doctor about those options, all of those kind of things. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to helping you feel and perform better